I was 45 years old when I made the drive back to Hartwell Ridge, the town where my childhood lay buried under years of dust and silence. Funny thing at that age, you're caught between feeling too old for fresh wounds and too young for the ones you already carry. The road stretched out in front of me like a grey ribbon stitched through November fields, and I drove it with the quiet resignation of someone returning not by choice, but by something heavier, older, almost ancestral. My grandmother, Evelyn Hartwell, had died, and I was coming home to bury her. The sky was low and colourless, a sheet of dull silver threatening rain, but not committing to it. Evelyn would have liked that. She always said rain behaved like people. It stalled when it was thinking, rushed when it was angry, cleared quickly after saying what it needed to say. I almost smiled. She had a way of turning small, mundane things into quiet fables. As I drove, familiar landmarks emerged like ghosts stepping forward from fog. The leaning barn with half its roof caved in, the crooked wooden sign advertising fresh honey cash only, the stone bridge patched so many times its surface looked like a quilt of mistakes. My hair blonde, already giving way to threads of silver at the temples caught in the rearview mirror as I adjusted it. The silver had started creeping in 2 years ago, and I'd grown surprisingly fond of it. It made me look more like Evelyn, or at least like the version of her I remembered in her 50s, sharp, composed, radiating a certainty about the world that I naively mistook for invincibility. I pressed my fingers against the steering wheel and exhaled slowly. The closer I got to town, the more my chest tightened. Nostalgia has claws. You think it's going to hold you gently, but it digs in, reminding you of every moment you failed to appreciate until it was gone. The sign appeared, "Welcome to Hartwell Ridge, population 2,184. Someone had drawn a muster on the painted face of the cartoon miner. The act felt almost criminal. If Evelyn were still alive, she would have marched right up to the town council and demanded the sign be cleaned. Presentation matters, she used to say. Mess invites disrespect, and disrespect invites ruin. I slowed as I passed the turn-off toward the old Hartwell factory, the business she built from nothing. From a 2-person workshop to one of the region's most profitable manufacturing operations. She did it mostly alone, unless you counted me trailing behind her as a kid, absorbing things she probably didn't realize she was teaching. Everyone else in the family wanted the wealth. I just wanted the grandmother. The funeral was held at St. James Chapel, where the stained glass windows cast fractured light onto worn wooden pews. When I stepped inside, murmurs hushed, heads turned. My relatives, the entire dysfunctional catalogue of Hartwell bloodline, sat in stiff rows, greased with expectation. I hadn't seen most of them in years, and the distance hadn't softened them. My cousin Derek, red-faced and sweaty, nodded at me with a tight, calculating smile. My Aunt Linda clutched a lace handkerchief, but only dabbed her face when someone looked her way. Uncle Raymond adjusted his expensive watch every 40 seconds, as if he were reminding us all of the time he was losing by being here. Greed has its own posture, its own scent. I could smell it like cologne. When I approached the casket, my breath stilled. Evelyn looked small, impossibly small. She'd been a force of nature in life, all sharp angles and unsaid opinions. But now she lay still, wrapped in layers of satin. Nothing like the woman who once marched barefoot across our muddy backyard, just to scold me for hiding a report card. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just placed a hand on the smooth polished wood and whispered, "I made it, Grandma." The service was simple as she requested. A few hymns, a eulogy delivered by Pastor Mills, who pronounced her name as if he were afraid of summoning her spirit. My mother, Evelyn's daughter, sat stiffly, chest expanding and collapsing in practiced grief. She had always struggled to understand Evelyn's intensity, and Evelyn in turn struggled to understand my mother's fragility. After the burial, the family clustered in hungry little cliques, already murmuring about the will reading scheduled for the afternoon. Hartwell blood was never subtle. I hung back, wanting a few more minutes by the grave before being swallowed by the chaos of obligations. The sky finally committed to a drizzle-fine, cold drops that tapped at my coat like impatient fingers. I heard footsteps behind me. "You've been gone a long time." My sister's voice. Emma. Younger by 3 years, sharper by 10. "I came as soon as I heard," I said. She crossed her arms, her gaze slicing through me. She left clues, instructions, separate envelopes for all of us. I'm telling you now, if she divided anything in a way that seems uneven, I won't stand for it. I almost laughed. The woman had barely let the coffin touch dirt. I'm not expecting anything, I said. You know that. That's exactly why I'm worried. She stepped closer. You were her favourite. I didn't respond. Favourites are complicated. They cost more than they give. Before I could say anything else, Emma walked away, heels crunching on gravel. As the rest drifted toward their cars, I stood alone beside the fresh mound of earth, rain softening its surface. Childhood memories surfaced in disordered flashes, Evelyn teaching me how to plant tomatoes, showing me how to balance honesty with kindness, warning me that the truth was a blade to be wielded carefully. I felt older than 45, and strangely younger too, as if returning here had peeled away years. Eventually I returned to my rental car, rain streaking down the windshield. The lawyer's office was 10 minutes away. I started the engine, heart sinking with each rotation of the tyres. I already knew that today the Hartwell and Brandt law office sat just off Main Street, wedged between a shuttered bakery and a barber shop that hadn't changed its prices or its wallpaper since the 70s. The building looked smaller than I remembered, its bricks darkened by decades of rain and winter salt. A bell chimed overhead when I stepped inside, the same mellow chime that used to ring when I was a kid, waiting for Grandma to finish signing papers. The waiting room had been renovated, but only halfway new carpet laid over old creaking floorboards, freshly painted walls paired with chairs that must have survived at least 3 presidents. My family filled the space like a cluster of ravens perched on mismatched branches. They stopped talking when I entered. Some stared, some nodded stiffly, some looked me up and down as if checking whether grief had made me vulnerable enough to be manipulated. "Look who finally arrived," Aunt Linda said, loud enough for everyone to hear. She always treated passive aggression like an Olympic sport. "I've been here since the funeral," I replied calmly. She sniffed as if that answered something no one had asked. The lawyer, Mr. Dunley, appeared in the doorway to the conference room. He looked exactly as I remembered him. Square glasses, thin grey hair combed precisely back, a face that could express sympathy without actually containing any. "If you'll all come in," he said, "we'll begin shortly." The room was small, panelled with dark wood that smelled faintly of lemon oil and age. Family members shuffled inside, filling chairs with a mix of impatience and quiet, simmering greed. I took a seat near the corner, not wanting to be in the centre of whatever emotional storm was brewing. But Derek plopped down next to me anyway, smelling faintly of aftershave and self-satisfaction. "Big day, huh?" he whispered, nudging me with an elbow. "For who?" He grinned. "Come on, man. It's Evelyn Hartwell's estate. The woman was worth 8 figures. Probably 9 by the end." He said it the way most people talk about a lottery. I just breathed out slowly. "She wasn't a vault," I said. "She was our grandmother." He rolled his eyes. "Sure, but that won't pay for much." Before I could respond, Mr. Dunley shut the door and cleared his throat. The room fell silent immediately. "Thank you all for coming," he began, "and please accept again my condolences for your loss. Evelyn Hartwell was a formidable woman, and it was my honour to serve her for over 30 years. My mother folded her hands in her lap. Emma leaned forward, eyes sharp. The others, all cousins, uncles, far-flung relatives who suddenly remembered their lineage smelled blood in the water. Dunley opened a thick folder and took out a sealed envelope. "This is her revised will, executed 7 months ago." 7 months. That was around the time Evelyn had been hospitalised for the first time. A small knot formed in my throat. He broke the seal. "The will is clear," he said, "and binding. Per the request of the deceased, I will read it exactly as written." He adjusted his glasses and began. "I, Evelyn Margaret Hartwell, being of sound mind and full clarity of judgment, do hereby declare this my final will and testament." My heart beat quietly but steadily, a slow drum under my ribs. "To my children, grandchildren, and extended family, I leave $1 each." The room reacted in a single synchronized moment, like birds startled off a wire. "What? You're kidding. This is absurd." "She did not mean that." Voices rose. overlapping in a chorus of disbelief and outrage. $1. The words seemed to echo in the room, bouncing off the wood-panelled walls like a cruel joke. Dunley raised a hand. Please, there is more. Everyone fell silent, though not quietly. To my grandson. Eyes shifted, my stomach clenched. I leave the small wooden box found in the top drawer of my bedroom dresser. A wave of confusion rippled across the room. Derek snorted. Seriously? That's it? A box? Aunt Linda crossed her arms so tightly her shoulders lifted. My mother stared at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Disappointment? Pity? Resentment? Maybe all three. Dunley closed the folder. That concludes the will, chaos erupted. This is outrageous. She must have been pressured. We'll contest this immediately. She can't just give everything away. Actually, Dunley said, raising his voice, there is no mention of the business or any assets beyond what I've read. That's impossible, Uncle Raymond barked. The woman owned a company, 12 properties, 3 investment portfolios. Where is all of that? Dunley gave a measured look. The will contains what she wished to distribute through me. Anything not listed was already transferred or handled separately before her death. A tense silence followed. Then he held up the small wooden box. It was older than I remembered. Dark walnut, corners rounded from years of handling. A thin layer of dust coated the lid. This, he said, is for you. He walked it to me. I accepted it with both hands, feeling its unexpected weight. The box was cold, the wood worn smooth as river stone. Derek let out a laugh. A cruel one. Wow! Congratulations, man. You really scored. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. You can't argue with a man who enjoys your humiliation. I ran my thumb over the lid. It didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a puzzle, or a test. Evelyn never made anything easy. The room devolved into bickering again, accusations, whispered threats, and sharp glances swung like knives. Dunley tried to mediate, but no one listened. I stood quietly, box in hand, and slipped out of the room. No one followed me. Funny. The moment there was nothing they wanted from me, I became invisible. Outside, the cool air hit my face like a truth I didn't want to acknowledge. The clouds had darkened again, gathering in thick, restless layers above the roofs of Hartwell Ridge. I set the box on the passenger seat of my car and sat there for a long moment, fingers trembling slightly. Not from fear, not exactly, from anticipation, from the weight of something I didn't yet understand. I took a deep breath, turned the key, and drove to the only place I could examine the box in peace. Evelyn's old house. The home where she raised me almost as much as my own parents did. The home where secrets had a way of hiding in plain sight. And where, I suspected, this box would finally open. Evelyn's house sat at the top of a sloping hill, overlooking the town like a stern overseer. The driveway was still cracked, the porch still leaning slightly to the left, and the wind chimes she'd hung decades ago still clattered with that hollow, metallic rattle that marked my childhood summers. I parked beside the hydrangea bushes, now dry and brown, and carried the box up the creaking steps. The key to the front door was still on my ring. Evelyn had given it to me when I turned 21. You'll know when to use it, she'd said with that enigmatic half-smile. I guess she always knew this day would come. The house smelled exactly the same. Old books, lavender polish, and the faintest hint of something earthy, maybe the cedar she kept in all her drawers. My breath caught for a moment, a wave of memory washing over me so suddenly it made my chest ache. I went to the kitchen, where the afternoon light filtered through the curtains in pale streaks. I set the wooden box on the table. It looked harmless enough, sturdy, worn, unremarkable. Certainly not worth a family fortune or the storm of resentment still swirling back in that law office. I hesitated before lifting the lid. My hands didn't shake out of fear, but out of something much more complicated, nostalgia maybe, or grief, or the strange intuition that whatever was inside this box was going to change something fundamental. I opened it. Dust swirled into the air, carrying the faint scent of old paper and forgotten corners. Inside lay a mess that could only be described as trash. Broken trinkets, torn photographs, yellowed scraps of paper, bent bottle caps, a cracked porcelain figurine of a dancer with only one arm left, a metal key with no label, dried petals from flowers long dead, a brittle ribbon frayed at both ends, and a stack of envelopes so worn their corners curled up like autumn leaves. I stared, disappointment prickling along my spine. Grandma, what were you thinking? The sight was both absurd and haunting. Everything looked worthless, meaningless, a collection of fragments from a life too vast to be contained in a box. Still, I reached in and began examining each item. A chipped marble, blue with a swirl of white. I remembered it vaguely from when I was 6. I dropped it through a floorboard crack in the attic and cried for an hour until Evelyn found me. "You'll lose 1,000 things in your life," she'd said softly, "but the important ones have a way of finding you again." I swallowed hard. A torn corner of a photograph. Only a hand was visible, a man's hand from the look of it. Whose, I didn't know. A brittle envelope. Inside was a scrap of newspaper, dated 40 years ago, with a headline about the factory opening its 3rd location. I set it aside, a brooch missing its central stone. The metal was tarnished, cheap. I brushed my thumb over it, and a faint memory stirred. Evelyn wearing it to one of my elementary school plays. "You don't need real gems to show up for someone," she had said afterward, when a teacher complimented the brooch. "Just presents." She'd always believed in presents. A stack of letters tied with old twine. The paper was yellowed and thin. The ink had faded into ghostly trails. Some letters were addressed to EMH. Others weren't addressed at all. I untied the twine slowly, like undressing a secret. The first letter was only a single sentence. "Trust the one who never asked for anything." I exhaled shakily. Was that about me, or someone else entirely? The words felt too pointed, too deliberate. I continued digging. A wooden toy block with the letter H. I had dozens of memories of these blocks scattered across her living room floor. I used to build towers, castles, mazes, anything to pass the long afternoon she babysat me while my parents worked. "H is for Hartwell," she'd say, guiding my small hand, "and that name means something." The block felt heavier in my hand than it should. And then, at the bottom, my fingers found something smoother, firmer, a document. Folded carefully, wrapped in a thin piece of parchment to disguise it. It didn't look old. It didn't smell like the rest of the box. My breath quickened. Hand steady, I lifted it free and unfolded the parchment. Inside was a crisp, official-looking document with legal letterhead, and Evelyn's signature stamped at the bottom in dark ink. Transfer of complete ownership. Hartwell Manufacturing and Holdings, LLC. My heart slammed against my ribs. The document stated unequivocally that 100% of the business, every asset, every property, every account was transferred to me, effective immediately, irrevocably, contingent on her death. A notarized seal gleamed in the lower corner. My name was printed in bold letters. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't symbolic. This wasn't a sentimental gesture. This was everything. I sank into the chair, the air leaving my lungs in a slow, disbelieving exhale. Grandma, why me? It wasn't pride I felt, or triumph, or the thrill of sudden power. It was something heavier, responsibility, fear, sadness, confusion, a sharp, cutting love that felt too big to hold. And beneath it all, the dawning realization that she had known exactly what she was doing with that box of trash. She'd hidden the truth in plain sight, wrapped the real inheritance in broken memories and forgotten pieces of her life, protected it from greedy hands, but not from me. I stared at the document for a long time, rain tapping against the window in steady, relentless beats. I felt myself sinking into something deep, something ancient in the marrow of this family. A truth was buried here, one I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. A knock on the front door shattered the stillness. I flinched, folding the document instinctively and sliding it under my leg as if I were a teenager hiding a report card. Another knock harder, impatient. My pulse quickened. I knew that knock. Family. And they weren't here to grieve. They were here because they smelled something, and they wanted what wasn't theirs. The knocking didn't stop immediately. It continued in sharp bursts, 3 knocks. A pause, then 3 more, just insistent enough to make it clear that whoever stood on the other side believed they were entitled to enter. Typical. I ignored it. Not out of defiance, but because I needed a moment, just a moment to breathe, to absorb what the document meant, to understand what Evelyn had entrusted to me, and why. My fingers brushed the edges of the papers hidden beneath my hand. The sense of responsibility settled like a weight between my ribs, heavy, steady, the kind that would change the shape of my days forever. The knocking eventually stopped, replaced by muffled voices arguing outside. But my focus drifted inward, pulled backward by memory, toward the woman who had created this moment long before I'd realized it. My grandmother, Evelyn Hartwell, a force of nature wrapped in pressed linen and quiet steel. I leaned back in the chair, letting the memories take shape. Flashback, lessons in the garden. I was 9 the first time she told me that honesty was a tool, not a weapon. We were in her garden, her sanctuary, where tomatoes grew in disciplined rows and basil filled the air with a warm, peppery scent. She handed me a small trowel and nodded toward a patch of soil. Dig there, gently. You're looking for roots, not treasure. I remember frowning. Why not treasure? She smiled in that knowing way. Because treasure never teaches you anything worth learning. Back then I didn't understand. Now it felt prophetic. As I dug, I accidentally sliced through a root. I gasped, horrified, expecting a scolding. Instead, she crouched beside me, lifted the severed piece and turned it over in her palm. Damage happens when you move too quickly, she said, especially with the truth. Slow down, think, then act. She pressed the broken root into the soil again, burying it with deliberate care. Most things survive if you treat them with respect, she added. People included. I hadn't realized it then, but she was already training me, shaping me far more than my parents ever did. Flashback. The day I lied. I was 12 when I lied to her for the first and last time. I had broken a vase in her living room, a delicate blue and white porcelain piece she'd brought back from a business trip. Terrified of disappointing her, I blamed it on the cat. Evelyn stared at me for a long moment, then sat down in her armchair. Come here. Her voice wasn't sharp, that made it worse. I stood in front of her, unable to look her in the eye. I don't care about the vase, she said quietly, but I care about you, and when you lie, you carve pieces out of yourself. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I didn't. Look at me. I did. Her gaze was not angry, it was disappointed. And disappointment from her felt worse than any punishment. You're better than this, she said, so you're going to tell the truth, not for my sake, for yours. I confessed. She nodded once, satisfied. Good, now go get the broom. That was it. No lecture, no punishment, just a quiet expectation that I would be the man she believed I could be. At the time I didn't know why she held me to a different standard than everyone else. Now I suspected it was because she had already chosen me. Flashback, the truth about family. There was another moment, one that returned to me now with unsettling clarity. I was 19 home from college for a weekend when I overheard a conversation between Evelyn and my mother. They didn't know I was in the hallway. He doesn't need pressure from you, Evelyn was saying. Her tone was calm but unyielding. He needs guidance, my mother insisted. He's 20. He needs direction. He has direction, Evelyn countered. He just doesn't need it carved into him. Silence. Then my mother's voice, brittle, almost resentful. He listens to you more than me? Evelyn sighed softly. He listens to kindness. You should try it. The words stung even now, decades later. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. I slipped away before they noticed me. Later that night, Evelyn tucked an envelope into my hand before I left. There was no money inside, no instructions, just a note in her sharp, elegant handwriting. Your choices will always matter more than their expectations. That line returned to me now with painful resonance. Flashback in the factory. Some of my most vivid memories of her were inside the factory itself, a place most grandchildren never went. She'd take me on weekends when she needed to oversee operations. The smell of machine oil, metal shavings, and warm plastic always clung to her clothes afterward. One day, she brought me to a corner office overlooking the production floor. Workers moved in rhythmic synchronization. Machines hummed like a mechanical heartbeat, and Evelyn leaned over the railing with a quiet intensity. "Everything down there exists because I refuse to let the world decide what I was capable of," she said. "But a legacy means nothing if the wrong person inherits it." I glanced up at her. "Who's the right person?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she rested a hand lightly on my shoulder. "Someone who understands the weight of responsibility," she finally said, "not the thrill of ownership." Back then, I didn't realize she was already evaluating us all, me, my sister, my cousins. She watched how we treated people, how we handled disappointment, how we responded to temptation. She knew exactly who would crumble under wealth, and who wouldn't. Back in the present, the memories softened the sharpness of the moment, but only slightly. The knocking outside had stopped. The voices had drifted away. The house had settled into its old, familiar stillness. I reached into the box again, brushing aside the scraps of paper, the broken trinkets, the fragments of someone else's life. Everything she left me had meaning. Every piece, every scrap, every memory woven through these objects was a message. If the house had possessed nerves, they would have been visibly twitching. By the time I stepped out of Evelyn's study with the binder still warm in my hands, the entire family had converged in the downstairs hallway, as if pulled by the same gravitational panic. Their eyes turned to me in a single synchronized snap like a flock sensing a predator. And apparently, I was it. The air had a different density now, heavier and electrically charged, like the moment before a storm cracks open. My mother was the first to speak. "What is that?" she demanded, pointing at the binder as though it were a live explosive. I held it gently against my chest. "Evidence," Uncle Randall scoffed. "Evidence of what? That Evelyn went senile at the end?" His voice wasn't loud, but it scraped. Aunt Marlene, with her rigid bun and thinly pressed lips, drew closer. "You will hand that over. Right now." I didn't move. No. The room seemed to still, even the motes of dust captured in the sunlight pausing mid-float. My refusal had been a calm one, quiet, almost polite, but it landed like a brick hurled into a pond. "James," my mother said, stepping forward. Her voice trembled, not with sorrow, but with a cold, precise fury. "This is not the time for childish standoffs. Give it here." Again. "No. There is a certain tone your voice takes when you're done placating people you've spent your whole life placating. It's not dramatic, it's not aggressive, it's final." And they all heard it. "Then we'll get it from the lawyer," Randall snapped. I looked him in the eye. "Good luck. He's already confirmed the will is airtight." That was when the real explosion began. They came at me like a hound, pack-loud, overlapping, frantic, desperate. She must have been coerced. He manipulated her. He lived out of town for decades. Why him? He's always been her favourite. He brainwashed her. Evelyn was not in her right mind. I can contest this. This cannot stand. Every voice was jagged, frantic. Every accusation stung, not because any of it was true, but because these were the people who had eaten at Evelyn's table their entire lives, people she had tried to teach fairness to, decency to, and all they revealed now was the exposed machinery of their greed. Their faces twisted, their voices cracked. They weren't grieving. They were panicking over money they had already mentally spent. I hadn't realized I'd backed up against the banister until the wood tapped my spine. "Stop," I said. Nobody listened. "Stop." This time my voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The weight of grief, years, exhaustion, and something else. Responsibility. They fell silent. Surprised by the crack of steel they weren't used to hearing from me, I took a breath. "Look, I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't even want any of this." My voice felt like exposed nerves. "But she chose me. You can hate that. You can hate me. But I won't disrespect her wishes by handing anything over or letting you twist it." I could almost hear Evelyn's voice whispering behind this moment. A Hartwell doesn't bend to tantrums. Randall stepped forward until he was nearly nose to nose with me. His breath smelled of coffee and bitterness. "You think you can handle Hartwell Industries?" he hissed. I didn't blink. "I think she believed I could." "And that's enough for you?" I swallowed. "It has to be." "That isn't an answer." "Yes, it is." My mother's voice thin and trembling with anger. "James, you're making a very unwise choice." I turned to her with a gentleness that surprised even me. "Mum, the unwise choice would be betraying her final decision." She flinched as if struck, not because I'd raised my voice, but because I hadn't. My calmness scared them far more than shouting ever could. And then came a sound I didn't expect, a sobbing breath. Not from my mother, not from any of the uncles or aunts, but from Lydia. My cousin, quiet, soft-spoken, almost invisible at every holiday. She had always been the background character in this family, overshadowed by louder siblings, dismissed by her parents, forgotten by the rest of us. She was small, brunette, her hair always carefully tucked behind her ear, as if she wanted nothing more than to disappear. Now her eyes were glassy. She looked afraid. "What happens to us now?" she whispered. Nobody else reacted to her voice. They didn't even hear her. They were too wrapped up in their own outrage to notice their own daughter trembling. But I did. Her fear struck me in a place deeper than anger ever could, because that was exactly what Evelyn meant by protect the vulnerable. Lydia wasn't grasping for money. She was scared of where this family storm would toss her. She wasn't greedy. She was collateral. Before I could respond to her, Randall slammed a fist against the wall beside him, making everyone jump. "This isn't over," he snarled. "We'll see you in court." I nodded once. "Then I'll see you there." "You're ready for a war?" I met his eyes, steady. "If it means honouring her, yes." He stumbled back just half a step, but enough to reveal he hadn't expected that answer. Aunt Marlene spat on the floor, not literally, but her expression was the verbal equivalent. "You self-righteous," but she didn't finish. They all stormed out one by one, their outrage trailing behind them like torn pieces of dark fabric. Doors slammed, engines roared to life outside, tires spit gravel as cars whipped down the driveway, and then silence, except for Lydia, who still stood in the hallway wringing her hands. I approached her slowly, like approaching a frightened deer. "You okay?" I asked softly. She shook her head. "They're going to tear you apart, James." "Maybe," I said. "But they won't win." "You don't know what they're capable of," I smiled gently. "I know what I'm capable of, and I know what she wanted." The next morning dawned with a grey, watchful stillness, the sort of sky that seemed unsure whether to rain or simply brood. I hadn't slept. The house groaned softly in the shifting temperature, as if Evelyn herself were stretching old bones before rising. I sat at her kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee, my fingers tracing the grain in the wood scars and grooves from decades of meals, arguments, reconciliations. Evelyn used to say a kitchen table was where truth lived. People tell the truth when their hands are idle and their stomachs are waiting. And she was right. So many of our honest conversations had begun right here, where sunlight spilled across cracked placemats. For the first time since she died, the weight of her absence pressed fully onto my shoulders, not like a blanket, but like armour I wasn't certain I deserved. A company, a secret workbook of instruction and warning, a fractured family ready to tear itself apart. She left me all of it, believing I could carry what she could no longer hold. Why me, Evelyn? Why only me? As if in answer, a soft tapping drew my eyes toward the hallway. Not a sound. A light. Something faintly glowing at the far end, a thin golden seam of morning sun slicing beneath the door of Evelyn's bedroom. It was the only room I hadn't entered since returning. I'd avoided it like a confession booth I wasn't prepared to kneel inside, but now something pulled me. The binder sat on the table, its edges slightly frayed, smelling faintly of dust and lavender. I took it with me as I walked down the hallway, slow steps echoing on old wooden floors. Her bedroom door creaked open with a soft, reluctant sigh. The scent hit me first lavender sachets, cedar, the faintest note of her perfume. Something tightened in my chest. It was like walking into a memory that hadn't yet realized she was gone. The room was exactly as she left it. Neatly folded quilt, books stacked with mathematical precision on her nightstand, a framed black and white photograph of her standing on the factory floor decades earlier, sleeves rolled up, chin raised in a challenge to a world that doubted her. But what caught my eye was a small, square box on her dresser. Not the trash box that was still waiting in the study, but a different one. Silk-lined, dark mahogany, with a small envelope placed on top, my name handwritten in her looping script. For a few moments I simply stood there, staring at that envelope, the curve of the J, the way she always made her S, slightly elongated. I'd seen her write it hundreds of times on birthday cards, notes tucked into my coat pocket as a kid, grocery lists pinned to the fridge. My throat tightened. I sat on the edge of her bed, the envelope trembling in my hands. After 3 deep breaths, I opened it. Inside was a letter, and not a short one. My dear James, if you are reading this, then you have accepted what I asked of you, even if you have done so reluctantly, or in anger, or in confusion. You always were a thoughtful one, even as a boy, never rushing to an answer before turning it over a few times. I imagine you're doing that now, so before you torture yourself with questions, let me answer the one I know is burning. Why you, and not them? The simple truth is this. You are the only one who never asked for anything from me but my time. Your cousins, siblings, uncles, they are not bad people. Do not make the mistake of vilifying them. Greed is a sickness that is easier caught than cured. Over decades I watched them drift away from the values this family once lived by. But you stayed honest, even when honesty cost you friends or opportunities. You stayed kind, even when others took advantage of that kindness. You stayed fair even when fairness gave you nothing in return. Those qualities cannot be bought, taught, or forced. They are earned slowly, painfully, through the bruises of a life lived sincerely. I built the business with my own hands. I bled for it. I sacrificed more than I care to admit. I gave the others chances, too many chances perhaps. But they twisted each one until I could no longer deny the truth. They wanted the fruits of the tree, not the responsibility of tending it. You, James, you were the only one who ever asked me, "Are you taking care of yourself?" You said that to me the night your grandfather died. Do you remember? You were 15. Everyone else was interested in what the will said. You found me crying in the pantry and asked if I needed water. That was when I knew. The company is not a prize. It is a burden, one that must be shouldered by someone with a spine and a conscience, someone humble enough to listen and strong enough to act. I know what this inheritance will cost you. I know the family will tear at you. I know they will threaten, manipulate, even lie. But I also know you will rise, not because you are fearless, but because you are fair. In the box I left with the others is the key to the truth behind our family's fractures. The letters, the documents, the mistakes I made, the ones your mother made, and yes, the ones your grandfather hid. There are things in our history that may hurt to read, but they are necessary. I will not let you inherit a lie. When the storm comes, and it will remember this, integrity is worth more than comfort. And finally, I loved you more than you knew, not because you were perfect, but because you kept trying. Be patient with them, even with the ones who will hate you.